Welcome to Science Headliners. Our discussion today is with Michelle Hanlon. Please welcome our host from Linda Hall Library, Vice President for Public Programs, Eric Ward.
Michelle Hanlon is co-director of the Air and Space Law program at the University of Mississippi School of Law and an instructor of aviation and space law. She received her BA in political science from Yale, her JD magna cum laude from the Georgetown University Law Center, and a Master of Laws in Air and Space Law from McGill University, where the focus of her research was commercial space and the intersection of commerce and public law. Professor Hanlon is also co-founder and president of For All Moonkind, a nonprofit corporation that is the only organization in the world focused on protecting human cultural heritage in outer space. Professor Hanlon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I love talking about space and certainly about For All Moonkind and about turning humanity into a truly spacefaring species.
Well, I want to begin with the One Small Step Act. At the end of 2020, in the midst of all of the COVID-19 news and all of the political turmoil, the president signed into law on New Year's Eve, I believe, the One Small Step Act. What is that new law and why is it important?
So the One Small Step Act is an incredibly important law because it's the first time any nation on Earth has recognized that we have human heritage in outer space. So what do I mean by human heritage? I'm talking about all of the trips that humans have made to the moon and all of the stuff that humans have sent to the moon. What people don't realize, as we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Neil Armstrong's small step and giant leap, people don't realize those boot prints that he and Buzz Aldrin put on the moon aren't protected by any law. Anybody, any rover, anything could go up there and just erase those footprints. And so we thought it was really important to protect them, but the same way we protect things like the Laetoli footprints in Tanzania, where the show that the first footsteps taken by humans on 2 feet instead of 4. We think that the boot print is just so inspiring. And although I may never get to the moon to see it, I want my children or my grandchildren or their children to be able to see it and draw the inspiration, because that achievement of putting a human on the moon is the greatest technological achievement of humanity to date. And it's something that we really need to memorialize. So the importance of the One Small Step Act, beyond just sort of recognizing, wow, we recognize cultural heritage here on Earth and we protect it, we need to recognize ourselves as a spacefaring species and recognize that we have moved off of our planet and recognize that we are going to continue to explore and move off of our planet. There are a lot of companies and countries going back to the moon in the next 5-10 years, and we need to protect what we have there, the history, and it includes Apollo, it includes the Soviet landers, the Luna missions. Luna 2 was the first hard landing, first time anything human-made landed on another celestial object. Luna 9 was the first soft landing on the moon. And so on top of all that, the really remarkable thing about the One Small Step Act is that it proves that space is nonpartisan. This is an act that was came together with the forces of Senator Gary Peters from Michigan and Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. The two of them got it unanimously passed in the Senate. And then in the House, it was taken up by Representative Horn and I'm blanking on her Republican colleague, Babin, I believe, Representative Babin. And it passed the House as well unanimously. And then it was signed by a Republican president. What we do, our endeavors in space aren't Republican or Democrat. They're not American or Chinese. They're human endeavors. And we're finally beginning to recognize that with things like the One Small Step Act.
How much stuff is up on the moon? What are we talking about protecting up there?
So there's actually more than 100 sites on the moon with human stuff on them. And that really blows people away. There were 24 Luna missions. There have been 5 Chang'e missions. Chandrayaan did a hard landing. An Israeli company, SpaceIL, did a hard landing. We send tons of robotic missions prior to Apollo. So yeah, we have identified 112 sites on the moon with human stuff on them. Now, we're not suggesting that every single site needs to be protected and preserved, and nobody should ever run them over. No, we are reminding people that we have a very rich history on the moon already. And while we live in a really exciting time, and boy, I'm so happy to be alive as we're looking at Artemis, with Perseverance on Mars. We've been doing this for a long time, so much so that we already have a history there. And so it's the stuff on the moon that we look at, we want to memorialize. And the really fantastic thing about our travel to the moon is that it is truly a human endeavor, in that we couldn't have gotten to the moon without the astronomers from Italy, who started to understand the relationship between the moon and the Earth. We couldn't have gotten to the moon without mathematicians in the Congo 3 million years ago starting to carve slashes on a baboon bone to start counting and start the process of math. And we couldn't have gotten to the moon without the metallurgists in Nigeria or the glassmakers in Mesopotamia. Our achievements in space are built on the backs and shoulders of all of our common ancestors, and that's something we really need to embrace.
The legal issue involved with the lunar landing sites and the other stuff on the moon involves the concept of property, right? And is that what's at the heart of the One Small Step Act, is recognizing the property on the moon?
So it's really interesting, and of course, this is the question of the decade, of the century, maybe, because there are resources on the moon that we ought to be able to mine. The Outer Space Treaty, which is sort of the Magna Carta of space law, states that no sovereign, no nation may claim territory anywhere in outer space by sovereignty or by any other means. And so when we think about the objects that we have on the moon, and let's take Tranquility Base because it's very recognizable. There have been efforts in the United States to make Tranquility Base a national park. Well, certainly that would be calling it, that would be claiming it on behalf of the United States, and we can't do that. So what happens on Earth when we have these incredible sites of universal heritage? We recognize them through the World Heritage Convention, and so we've protected the pyramids in Egypt, Stonehenge, the Great Wall. But the UNESCO World Heritage Convention is written so that you can only nominate a site if it's in your territory. Well, that means you can't nominate a site in outer space, because then you'd be claiming territory there. So it's this conundrum that what are we going to do? So what we are doing is we're not saying that there's actually property in space through this act, but this is the first step to understanding, okay, there are some places on the moon and on other celestial bodies on Mars that we want to protect, create a safety zone around, if you will. And that's the first concept. That's a concept that's being sort of explored in the Artemis Accords, which are bilateral agreements between the United States government and 10 other governments right now. Sort of understanding it's not claiming property, it's deconflicting activities, so that when you go to the moon, you are not causing problems for somebody else on the moon. And the international community really needs to get behind that. And we believe the way to get to that sort of common understanding of safety zones or exclusion zones, whatever we want to call them, will start with preservation, because everybody on Earth agrees that we need to protect our human heritage in outer space. Our human heritage, period, and we're working on moving that agreement into space. But if we can gain agreement on protecting Apollo, lunar landing sites and lunar landing sites, then we can move into agreeing about how we're going to protect people's other activities on the moon.
You mentioned the World Heritage Sites here on Earth, and those are administered by UNESCO at the United Nations. Is your organization, For All Moonkind, also involved with the United Nations?
So we are a permanent observer to the United Nations, but we're to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. So again, UNESCO is really focused terrestrially. They're doing, they're working very hard to protect our cultural heritage here on Earth, and we want to borrow a lot of what they do, because what they are. Somebody described them to me yesterday as the international organization that is focused on inclusivity, including everybody, including heritage and culture from every nation on Earth, and every people on Earth, indigenous people, so that we understand how incredible we are as human beings. For All Moonkind is really proud, however, to be a permanent observer to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is the committee which has, since the 1960s, actually kept the peace in space. It's a phenomenal UN body, I believe, one of the best functioning UN bodies that we have. It's run by the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, or they act as the secretariat. And I love telling people, yes, there is an organization at the UN devoted to outer space affairs. But what we're doing at the UN is we're talking to delegates. There's 94 countries that are delegates, and all countries are invited. And we're sort of testing this idea with people. We have now presented our concept to the UN over 6 different meetings. And I tell you, there's not one time that anybody has said to us, I don't think we ought to protect things on the moon, or, oh, that's a bad idea. This is an idea that everybody gets behind. And the only sort of negative comments we've received are, it's just going to be too hard. I don't think we can do it. And, if you don't say we can't do it, because if you say that to me, we're going to get it done.
Well, and that was actually going to be my next question. How optimistic are you that there will someday soon be international cooperation surrounding the preservation of these lunar landing sites?
So again, the United States has led the world in the regulation of space activities. We have one of the most robust regulatory processes in the country. And that means we are meeting our obligations and requirements under the Outer Space Treaties. So this One Small Step Act is an incredible leap, if you will, to gaining that international agreement about protecting heritage. If we can show the world that we're willing to put restrictions on our own people, on our own nationals, even if nobody else in the world is doing it. And we're telling our people, no, you cannot go and run over these boot prints. We're hoping other countries will follow. We're setting an example. And now I can go to the UN, the For All Moonkind can go to the UN in the next meeting in April and say, look, this isn't such a far-fetched idea. We have national legislation now, the first in the world. And now it's time for people to follow. And this shows people that it can be done. And it shows people that even spacefaring nations that are sort of committed to commercializing and building that space economy are understanding that we need to protect our history.
Does the One Small Step Act also govern commercial space companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, those types of organizations? So
unfortunately, the bill that I drafted would have said that what the One Small Step Act does is it takes NASA principles and guidelines, recommendations that NASA developed in 2011 to protect the Apollo lunar landing sites. And as originally drafted, the bill would have said any American company, any company that is an American national or an American individual or somehow has ties to the United States, launching from the United States, would be bound by those guidelines. It got watered down over the 2 years that it was sitting in the House, and now it only affects companies that are actually contracting with NASA, which is unfortunate. What is great about the bill, though, and what I'm really holding on to, is that when in the introductory language, it talks about the understanding of something we call due regard. So the Outer Space Treaty, the only sort of restriction on outer space activities that we have is that we have to have due regard for the activities of others. And so the bill brings up this concept of due regard. And I think it's an opening to let us sort of tease out what due regard means. And we can take that not just to people who are contracting with NASA, but to also to other American companies and individuals, and then ultimately internationally. So it truly is, it's a tiny little step in terms of what it actually, the practical effect of it, but it's a tremendous leap in terms of, wow, the United States Congress and the United States President has recognized that there are things on the moon that are valuable cultural heritage.
It's exciting news to see something like this passed by Congress and signed by the president. What's next for All Moonkind? What's your next big leap?
So we have a bunch of little irons in the fire. So we're building a registry of all of the items on the moon that we want to digitally that we want to share as an educational tool for people. So we want to a little girl in Ghana or in Indonesia or in Mississippi or a little boy in Russia to have the phone open and be able to see, wow, look at all this stuff on the moon. You look at that, that's a pitchfork. Oh, look, there's a golf ball, and sort of bring the moon into everybody's lives. So that's sort of our educational piece. Through the United Nations, we're going to be working really hard this year to get the United Nations to pass a resolution that will recognize we're not going to, we're taking baby steps. So we're not going to get our convention this year, but what we're hoping to get is a UN resolution that recognizes at least Apollo 11, Luna 2, Luna 9, these very well recognized firsts as something special. And so again, we'll have to figure out what that language is, talk to delegates, but if we can get a UN resolution that says, okay, we recognize there's some special stuff up there, that would be another tremendous small step towards our giant leap. And finally, we're working within the Congress to strengthen the One Small Step Act. Also, what we would really love to see is to have a sense of the Senate that the executive ought to be negotiating an international convention on protecting heritage in outer space. So in the United States, that's the big push for us right now.
I look forward to following your progress. It sounds like you got some exciting initiatives coming up. And for those who also want to follow along, I want to give out your website. It's forallmoonkind.org.
That's again, right. Moon, do you remember moon, not man, moon?
That's right. I want to end with 3 quick questions and just give me kind of the first thought that comes to mind. Number 1, at any point during your life, especially growing up, did you want to become an astronaut?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I did too. Yeah.
I hope every child has that at some point in their lives. I mean, there's so much wonder out there, and to look up and think about all that unexplored area. Yeah. I still hold out hope that I'll make it.
Well, that's a nice segue to question number 2. If affordable space tourism becomes a reality soon, would you consider going into space, maybe into low Earth orbit?
I'd go to Mars.
Exactly.
Sign me up. Yeah. My kids are grown; they don't need me anymore. Yeah,
And finally, question number 3: what year do you think humans will once again step foot on the moon?
2027.
What about Mars?
I would love to. I'd love what Elon Musk is doing. I am so thankful that people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are putting their private money into space flight so that it will become affordable. If not for me, then for my children. And I really want to see him succeed, but I don't see his timetable working. I think Mars in 2040.
Professor Hanlon, thank you again for joining me today. It's been a fascinating subject, and I know myself and all of us will look forward to following your progress.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Science Headliners has been made possible by the generous donations you make to the Linda Hall Library.